always thought there would be a breaking point in life, a moment when something snaps and you just change. For me, that moment wasn't loud in the traditional sense. It didn't come with shattering glass or slammed doors. Came with words. My mother's voice, sharp and cold like steel, cut through the quiet of a Sunday afternoon. I was standing in the kitchen holding a cup of tea, my fingers wrapped around the warmth like it was the only thing tethering me to the ground. I don't remember what we were arguing about. Something small. Something dumb. The kind of thing mothers and daughters always argue about. Laundry maybe, or the way I'd rearranged the spice cabinet. She was pacing, her slippers whispering against the hardwood floor. And then she stopped, looked me dead in the eye and said it. If you disappeared tomorrow, this house wouldn't collapse. The cup slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. It was almost cinematic, how it cracked into 3 perfect pieces like it was meant to break right then. For a second I just stared at it, not even blinking, like I couldn't process what had just happened, what had just been said. She didn't apologize. She didn't flinch. She just kept walking, mumbling something about how she was tired, how I was always making everything about me. It was like all the air had been sucked out of the room. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just stood there and let her words wrap themselves around my ribs like a vine of thorns. I was 35, unemployed, and living back home after a messy breakup and a failed business. Thought I was regrouping. Thought she understood. She'd said she did. When I moved back into my old room, walls still painted that pale yellow I'd begged for in high school, I told myself this was temporary. Just until I got back on my feet. She hugged me and told me I was welcome here. She told me this was still my home. But that day, all of that felt like a lie. Like she'd just been waiting for me to get out. The rest of the day passed in silence. Cleaned up the cup. She didn't come out of her room. I sat on the edge of my bed with a duffel bag half-packed from weeks ago. One I kept telling myself I'd unpack when I finally accepted this wasn't just a stopover but a return. I looked at it for a long time before I started throwing things in. Some clothes. My notebook. A framed photo of me and Dad at the beach, from when I was 7, when things felt simpler. I didn't even take my shoes off that night. I lay there in jeans and a hoodie, staring at the ceiling, trying to swallow the bitterness building in my throat. Dawn, I was gone. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. There was something almost poetic in the way I slipped out. Like I was trying to honor her words, trying to show her that I could disappear and the house would still stand just fine. The morning was cold. The kind of cold that stings your skin and makes your lungs ache. I dragged my suitcase down the driveway, each wheel bumping against the cracks in the pavement, and when I reached the end I paused. I looked back at the house, her house, and waited for something. A flicker in the window. A shadow in the doorway. Second chance. Nothing came. I took a bus into the city. Sat in the back, my fingers frozen around a styrofoam cup of cheap coffee. There were 5 people on that ride. None of them looked at me, none of them cared. I liked it that way. I watched the neighborhoods change through fogged-up windows. Brick houses turned to concrete buildings, and manicured lawns gave way to trash-strewn sidewalks. It felt like I was shedding skin with every mile, leaving behind not just my home, but a version of myself I no longer wanted to carry. I found a room to rent on the edge of downtown, a shoebox above a laundromat, with paper-thin walls and a bathroom that smelled like bleach and regret. But it was mine. The key felt heavy in my palm, and for the first time in months, I felt something like freedom. That night, I lay on a mattress that sagged in the middle, listening to the hum of machines downstairs and the occasional shout from the street. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out how everything had unraveled so fast. You see, my mother wasn't always like that. Or maybe she was and I just didn't notice. Growing up, she was the strong one. The one who held the family together after my father died. She worked 2 jobs, made dinner every night, sewed buttons back onto my school uniforms. She was tough, practical. She never cried. Not even at Dad's funeral. I thought she was a superhero. But maybe all those years of holding it together made her hard. Maybe the years chipped away at her, and now all that was left were sharp edges and brittle pride. Still, her words haunted me. Not just the cruelty, but the ease with which she said them. Like she'd rehearsed. Like she'd been waiting for the right moment to unload. I kept hearing that sentence in my head. If you disappeared tomorrow. And I started to wonder, would anyone notice if I did? I wasn't married. No kids. No job. My friends had slowly drifted away, tired of the sad version of me who always cancelled plans or cried at dinner. The only person left was her. And now, not even her. But I didn't want to be a ghost in my own story. So I forced myself to move. I found a part-time job at a second-hand bookstore run by a retired professor with wild eyebrows and a love for Faulkner. I stocked shelves, made tea, and learned how to fix cracked book spines. I rented out my photography gear and started doing portraits for people's pets, weddings, birthdays. Anything. I made just enough to pay rent and buy the occasional bottle of red wine that I drank while sitting cross-legged on my tiny floor, pretending it was some kind of ritual. Still, I never told anyone why I left. Not really. Because how do you explain that your mother broke your heart in a way no lover ever could? Some nights, I'd reread old letters Dad had written to Mom before they got married. He used to call her Sunflower because he said she always turned toward the light. I wondered when she stopped turning. When the shadows became more comfortable than the sun. I wondered if I reminded her too much of him. His softness, his dreams, the way he used to dance with me in the kitchen while she rolled her eyes but secretly smiled. I kept expecting her to call, to send a text, to say something, anything. Weeks passed, then months, nothing. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. But I also started to grow in ways I hadn't expected. I made friends at the bookstore, people who liked poetry and bad coffee and talked about things that mattered. I started writing again. Nothing big, just little essays and snippets of memory that I kept in a red leather journal. I wrote about the day my father died. About the smell of my mother's perfume when she tucked me in as a child. About the silence of that house when I left it behind. One night I wrote the sentence. Maybe the house didn't collapse, but something in me did. And I sat there staring at it, letting the truth of it settle in. Because I wasn't angry anymore. Not exactly. I was grieving. Grieving the mother I thought I had. Grieving the daughter I thought I was. And grief is a strange companion. It dulls over time, but it never truly leaves. That's why, when I finally got the call months later, from our old neighbor Mrs. Kelly, I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. Her voice was trembling. "Your mom had a fall," she said. "She's in the hospital. She's been asking about you." And just like that, everything I'd built around my heart began to crack. I didn't expect survival to be so quiet. I thought it would be louder somehow, more dramatic. But most days were a kind of soft ache, a slow-moving shadow that never quite left. I woke up in a cold room with no curtains on the windows, light spilling across the floor in sharp, unforgiving lines. I'd lie still for a few moments, listening to the city outside. Garbage trucks rumbling, dogs barking, someone cursing down the block. Every morning started the same. A deep breath, a moment of hesitation, and then I'd rise. There were days when I didn't have enough for more than a bagel and cheap coffee. The bookstore job helped, but barely. I counted quarters before getting on the bus. I skipped meals. I layered sweaters because the heater in my room worked only when it felt like it. The radiator groaned and clicked but never delivered warmth. At night, I curled under 3 blankets, wearing socks and a hoodie, my breath visible in the dark. And yet, kept going. Because for every moment I felt like giving up something, someone kept me tethered. Like Sasha, the barista at the cafe across from the bookstore. She had green hair, a silver ring through her nose, and a kindness that didn't ask questions. The first time she saw me shivering in the corner, trying to make a small coffee last 2 hours, she brought over a sandwich and just said, "It was going to get thrown out anyway." She lied, of course. It was fresh, warm, wrapped neatly in brown paper. The second time she didn't bother explaining. Just handed it to me and smiled. Then there was Ben, the owner of the bookstore. He was in his 70s, wore tweed jackets even in July, and spoke like every sentence deserved a footnote. At first, he treated me like just another temp, a filler until the holidays passed. But one rainy Tuesday, I found him sitting behind the counter, his reading glasses fogged up, wiping at his eyes with a trembling hand. Without thinking, I sat beside him. We didn't talk. I just sat there. That evening, he handed me a key to the store. "In case you ever need to be somewhere," he said. "Books are good company." I started spending my nights there sometimes. Not sleeping exactly. Just sitting in the poetry section, letting the words keep me warm. I'd read Sylvia Plath, Maya Angelou, Mary Oliver. Their voices reached into the hollow places inside me and filled them with something like hope. One night, I left a note in the margin of a battered copy of Wild Geese. "I'm still here. That has to count for something." I met Gerald in week 7. It was snowing hard that day. The kind of snow that quiets a city, makes everything feel softer and more fragile. I was walking back from a pet photo shoot. Yes, that was a thing I did to make ends meet, when I saw him outside a church, hunched against the wall, holding a sign that simply said, "Cold is just a word until it's in your bones." There was something about that line. About the way his eyes met mine, not begging, just seeing. I gave him my scarf. It was nothing special. Frayed at the ends, smelled faintly of old coffee and lavender detergent, but his hands wrapped around it like I'd handed him gold. "You got a poet's heart," he said. I laughed, unsure if it was a compliment. "You see pain and offer warmth. That's poetry." We started talking every Wednesday after my bookstore shift. I'd bring 2 cups of tea, one always peppermint because he hated chamomile, and he'd tell me stories about the life he used to have. About a wife named Darlene who loved sunflowers and a son he hadn't seen in 15 years. About the way you can lose everything and still find a reason to smile. Gerald never asked me why I was out there with him, giving tea to a man most people ignored. He just said, "Some of us don't have to fall all the way to the bottom to know what it looks like." I think that was his way of saying he saw my pain without needing the details. And I appreciated that. There were nights I cried in the bathroom of the bookstore, muffling my sobs in the sleeve of my hoodie so the walls wouldn't echo. I cried for the home I left behind. For the mother who never called. For the version of me that used to believe family was unconditional. But I also cried for the strange beauty of it all, for the way strangers became anchors, for the moments of unexpected grace. Like the older woman on the bus who handed me a pair of mittens without a word. Or the little girl at the park who asked if I was a book fairy, because she saw me carrying a stack of donated children's books. Or the janitor in my building who always nodded and said, "You're doing good, kid," as if he knew just how close I was to breaking some days. It was humbling. To need help. To accept it. But also, it was healing. Somewhere in that winter blur of soup kitchens, used socks and second-hand grace, I started to write again. Really write. I took the red journal Ben had given me and began filling it with everything. Memories, small moments, questions that didn't have answers. I wrote about my mother. About her hands, strong and calloused, always moving. About the way she used to sing while cooking when she thought no one was listening. About the time I scraped my knee and she carried me inside like I was made of glass. I wrote about how love can turn into something else when it's exhausted. About how sometimes people say cruel things not because they don't love you, but because they don't know how to handle their own pain. I didn't excuse her words, but I started to understand them. And maybe that was the beginning of forgiveness, not just for her but for myself. Because I wasn't perfect either. I came home broken and expected her to fix me. I wanted comfort, not confrontation. I wanted her to hold me without seeing the mess I'd become. But she was human. And humans fail. Spring came like a whisper. The snow melted slowly, leaving behind puddles and new beginnings. Gerald disappeared sometime in late March. I went to our usual bench with 2 cups of tea, but he never came. I waited an hour, then 2. Finally, the church volunteer came out and said, "He got placed in housing. Said to tell you thanks for the warmth." I cried all the way home. But this time they were good tears. The kind that come when you know something ended the way it should. Ben offered me more hours. Sasha invited me to her open mic night and clapped louder than anyone when I read one of my poems. I started pitching articles to small magazines and actually got one published. An essay called When the House Didn't Collapse. It was raw and a little angry and entirely true. I got a check for $75 and cried when it arrived. Not because of the money, but because someone out there read my story and said, yes, this mattered. It was around that time I received a letter. Handwritten. Careful cursive. No return address. Said, you left like a ghost. But this house has been too quiet without your footsteps. I didn't mean what I said. I was angry. I was scared. Maybe I still am. But I miss you. It wasn't signed. But I knew who it was from. I held that letter for a long time. Pressed it to my chest. Closed my eyes. I didn't rush to call. I didn't run home. But I did something just as brave. I forgave her. And I forgave myself for needing to leave. 'Cause sometimes love needs distance. And sometimes, kindness doesn't come from the people who raised you, but from those who meet you in the rubble and help you build something new. I was still standing. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't alone. It had been 1 year, 2 months and 13 days. Not that I was counting. But every morning I still saw the front steps of that house in my mind. The peeling white paint on the rail, the single crack in the third step, the wind chime my mother hung crookedly, saying it didn't matter because wind didn't care for symmetry. I remembered the smell of coffee from the open window, the creak of the door I used to slam too hard, and the way my mother always left her shoes neatly by the entrance, like she was trying to keep the chaos of the world outside, where it belonged. I stood across the street now, my hands shoved into the pockets of my jacket, heart pounding like I'd stolen something. In a way I'd stolen time, silence, distance. I hadn't told her I was coming. I hadn't sent a letter back. I hadn't called. I'd waited for something in me to settle. Something to forgive. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Quieter. No lights in the front window. No television glow. No shadow pacing in the kitchen like she used to when she couldn't sleep. For a long time I just stared. Let the wind bite my cheeks. Let the sky fade from gray to the kind of deep blue that holds stars like secrets. And then I crossed the street. My boots crunched softly on the gravel. I climbed the steps slowly, my fingertips brushing the handrail as if I needed to make sure it was still real. When I reached the door I hesitated. My reflection stared back at me from the dusty glass panel. Older, thinner, sharper around the eyes. I didn't look like the girl who had walked away. I wasn't her anymore. I raised my hand to knock. The door opened before I touched it. She was there. Smaller somehow. Her shoulders hunched in a sweater that looked too big, hair thinner, lines deeper. She didn't speak. Her lips trembled like she had words, but none brave enough to make it past her throat. And then she cried. Not quiet, careful tears. Not the kind you wipe away with dignity, but the kind that shook her whole body. The kind that only came when you'd held too much inside for far too long. She folded to her knees on the steps, right there, on the third one with the crack, and cried. I didn't know what to do. Froze. Because my mother didn't cry. She got angry. She got loud. She slammed dishes and doors. But she didn't break. Not like this. Mama, I whispered. Her fingers reached for mine, gripped like a lifeline. She looked up, and through the blur in her eyes, I saw something raw, something desperate. I thought I broke you, she choked out. Her voice was barely audible. I said it because I was scared. I was tired. You were slipping through my fingers and I didn't know how to hold you. I wanted you to fight back. I didn't think you'd leave. I sank to my knees too, right beside her. And I held her. For the first time in years, I wrapped my arms around her and felt her bones through the fabric. Felt her heartbeat stutter and gasp against my chest. I stroked her back like she used to do when I was sick. I didn't have the words yet. But I gave her what I could, presence. She kept apologizing. Over and over. Like a scratched record. Like penance. And I just let her. Because maybe she needed to hear it out loud as much as I needed to feel it. After a while the sobs faded. She leaned her head against my shoulder, breath ragged, and said softly, "I kept your room the same." He nodded. I figured. There was silence after that. But not the heavy kind. This was something gentler, fragile, like the hush after a storm. We sat there until the porch light clicked on automatically. Until the wind picked up and made us both shiver. She reached for my hand again, squeezed it, and stood. "You hungry?" she asked, in the same voice she used to offer grilled cheese on sick days. I laughed, cried a little too, and I said, "Yeah, Mama. I'm starving." Inside, everything was the same and not. The furniture hadn't moved. The photos were still on the mantel. Me in my graduation gown, Dad smiling in the background, frozen in a time we couldn't touch anymore. But there was dust, and dishes in the sink, and an emptiness that had grown roots in the corners. "I didn't know how to fill the space after you left," she said, placing a kettle on the stove. "I kept thinking you'd come back. I practiced what I'd say. But nothing ever sounded right. I thought I'd be mad at you for not writing. But I wasn't. I was just ashamed." She didn't look at me when she said it. But I watched her. Watched the way her hands trembled just slightly. The way she tried to steady them. "I wasn't easy to love," I said. "No," she replied. "But neither was I." We stared at each other. Two women made of mirrors. And I think that was the first time I truly saw her. Not just as my mother but as a woman. A woman who had her own bruises and blind spots. A woman who had carried grief like a second skin. Who had given me what love she had, in the only way she knew. The kettle whistled. We drank tea on the couch in silence. Then she handed me something. An envelope. Worn. Soft at the edges. "I wrote you letters," she said. "Every Sunday. I never sent them. But I couldn't throw them away either." Held it close. My throat too tight to speak. I didn't open it right then. I didn't need to. 'Cause I was here. Because she had cried on the steps. Because we were both still learning how to say I'm sorry without shame. And love without conditions. Outside, the wind chimes stirred. And for the first time in a long while, they sounded like home.